get back to the World Bank. Nigeria projecting the country's economy will see a modest growth this year, while inflation for next year was forecast to go lower at about 11% after the temporary impact of the fuel subsidy removal in the current year. And that was according to the lead economist of the World Bank Nigeria, Alex Sinhert, speaking today at the Lagos Business School. The World Bank also outlined some policy recommendations for Nigeria in its first half-year review report. Let's take a listen now to the Sinhert and other economists reviewing some of the recent policies of the new administration.
I know what's been in the news is the idea of a 5,000 or an 8,000 naira monthly transfer to needy households for about 6 months. If you look at the cost of that, it would be equivalent actually to just about 1 month's worth of spending on the subsidy that was happening before it was cancelled under the old exchange rate, still less than 2 months' worth under the new one. So it's not actually an enormous amount of resources relative to what's being freed up, and it might just help many poor and vulnerable households get through this without having to do things that really harm their prospects, right? Like pull a kid out of school, or not go to the hospital, or skip a meal, or whatever the case might be. The other thing we often hear is that 5,000 naira or 8,000 naira is a trivial amount of money. How's that going to help people? I think people would often actually be shocked to know that for a huge number of Nigerian households, it's a very significant amount of money. So I believe the statistic is that about 50% of Nigerian households are on less than 60,000 naira a month. So if you're giving them 5,000 or 8,000 extra for 6 months to help tide them over, you're increasing their earnings and their available incomes by, on the order of 10%. So for many households, it would be meaningful. All right, and then I mentioned that we have many other ideas about how to sort of bed things down. Let me just quickly give you a sense of those, and then I've definitely gone on long enough. So first order of business to sustain and deepen the FX policy reform. We would advocate for removing the remaining FX restrictions. So there are still restrictions on the use of FX for 43 products. That continues to drive some demand for currency into the parallel market. And it's also a conflation of trade policy with FX policy, which is not ideal. There are different ways of managing import demand, if that's what you want to do. CBN should keep actively communicating and ensuring clarity about what the new focus is, and just emphasizing that the new approach is a unified, market-reflective, transparently determined rate. And then FX policy is not done in isolation with other policies. So in the case of CBN, the whole orientation of monetary policy towards price stability could be strengthened, and that would be really good for the naira's value, right, including against the dollar. So issues of coordination with monetary policy. And then the whole agenda around tackling inflation is obviously a huge one, but some ideas include, reducing subsidized CBN lending to medium and large firms, ending the government borrowing from CBN. All of these things really increase the money supply, and reducing that rate of growth would be helpful to reduce inflation. And then replacing import and FX restrictions with tariffs would be helpful. And then there's a variety of other, if you like, micro measures that could be thought about, but these are just some sort of food for thought, if you like, on reducing inflation. And then to build on the PMS reform and rebuild fiscal space, clearly just sustaining the PMS subsidy removal is not trivial, because the fact that petrol prices are so much higher does create pressures. So basically keeping prices deregulated, but also ensuring that there's competition, curbing any malpractice, making sure that efficiency gains are passed on to consumers so that PMS prices can be as low as possible without the subsidy re-emerging. And then a variety of things to begin climbing that fiscal mountain that I described, to just begin to mobilize more revenues in such a way that spending can be increased to tackle the real priorities of the country. Now, obviously, that's kind of easy to say, and there are some parametric ideas like increasing the VAT rate and so on. I guess the deeper issue is that needs to come with trust building and transparency and clarity on how those increased resources are actually being spent, so that Nigerians are convinced that there is a kind of new compact underway where they can, they may have to pay more taxes in some ways, but they're getting better services and infrastructure that they value in return.
The key thing that is missing in the reforms is the level of thought process that went into it. And I've actually said that, look, the way the reforms are being implemented is putting a lie to those of us who have been advocating for market-oriented policies. And I pick one particular instance because this conversation is basically for possibly decision makers to take back and see the modification they need to do. One of which is a fact that exchange rate has not been able to achieve some level of stability. Because for economic agents, it doesn't really matter what the rate is for many of them. What matters most is that there is some level of stability. Because if you have that level of instability, you create uncertainties. And because of those uncertainties, we are leading to loss of confidence or panic that has actually set in. I give empirical examples. When the exchange rate was harmonized, some of us have said, look, if we have enough supply, if you are supplying the market what you used to supply, that you maintained the parallel market at 750, you should actually see a reduction in a convergence below the parallel market rate. And the simple logic of it is this. The demand for forex in the country is within a particular range. And previously, a large portion of that supply was going to a few entities. And those entities, some of them were not buying based on actual demand. They were buying for speculative purposes. So they round trip it back into the system and sell part of it in the parallel market. And we felt that if the central bank should supply the market the volume that it was giving even to those entities that we are bringing back to make some spread, that we will achieve a convergence below the parallel market rate. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. Why did it not happen? Which is why I talked about the level of preparation that should have taken place ahead of the harmonization. A couple of things has happened. One, when you harmonize the exchange rate above the official window, investors, business entities who had dollar exposure and we are in naira position had to lock in immediate exchange losses. And these exchange losses are non-notional, they are real. And if you take, for instance, assuming you are an airline operating a country and you have about maybe $300 million equivalent that you were bidding for to get from central bank at the remittance of ticket sales. And then all of a sudden, for each $1 million, you had provided about 460 million naira. So for each $1 million, the exchange had moved to 750 naira, for instance. That's for you to use that for purpose of discussion. And all of a sudden, your $1 million now became something like $600,000. Your natural reaction as an economic agent is stop my loss. And what do you expect to do? You said, okay, look, I've lost my shit. You could be a portfolio investor in the country that's trying to remit your dividend or proceeds of sale of securities. She says, if I've lost my shit, so let me first exit.
So what I would recommend to the World Bank is investigate this data on Nigeria's budget, and you will find this. And this was given to us by no other than the former Statistician General of the Federation, the man who actually, spearheaded the reforms that we have with the Statistics Office of the country. So we need to look at that. So I do not believe the data that we have for revenue and spending. Yes, fuel subsidy removal, foreign exchange, harmonization, all of this will, of course, if well implemented, will reduce corruption. But then the corruption, again, in the with data is another big issue. You spoke about inflation being elevated, even when we control for the external triggering factors. Russian-Ukrainian conflict and COVID-19 pandemic and all of that. Now, and then you concluded that by the beginning of next year, we'll see inflation turning the corners. But what conviction do we have? Okay. You know, it's good to talk about the market forces. It's good to use the market to address some of the shortcomings in the economy. We agree